Welcome back to the channel. Chris Morrison, Gulfside Ministries, and I have Tom Eckman with us back again. Tom, as always, thank you so much for being here with me today, sir.
Good to be here. Good to be
And
here.
I listen. I should just tell everybody. I think I mentioned this in our last video. By the way, if you've not seen Tom before, he and I had a great conversation on Galatians previously. Maybe some work on that in the future. I'm still trying to talk him into it. We'll see. That's right. But link in the description below for that. But Tom and I go way back. How long have we known each other now, Tom?
15 years, maybe, maybe a little
Yeah,
more.
I've been married 15, so I think I'm gonna be dated. I think it's probably closer to 20, man, because
Wouldn't surprise me.
Long.
Yeah, yeah.
So I met Tom many years ago at a free grace conference. So Tom has all the credentials, all the chops. We'll come to some of his books here in just a minute. So Dave, go check out that video for sure. And we both got our coffee going. I'm a trophy husband, and he's telling us life is short. Be awake for it, I think. So very good. Let me just come out the gate real quick with the big channel announcement, why I wanted to bring Tom on here. And then we're going to just have a fun conversation about Greek, actually. So Tom is a Greek. Tom, I'm going to call you an expert, and you can tell me that that's not the case. Tom is a Greek expert. I know Greek pretty well. You guys have seen my videos. I've been walking through the text of John much slower than I wanted to because life. Tom knows this stuff like the back of his hand. He teaches Greek. I'm going to tell you, let him tell you some of his educational background. I mean, he's a linguist by training. And so kind of the big channel announcement is Tom has agreed to come on and take over the learning Greek by reading the Greek New Testament series. So Tom is doing those videos. In fact, the first one is already done. That link is in the description below. So you can go ahead, finish this video first, and then go watch that. And so you'll be able to watch those. So and the big question is, well, why? Well, if you guys, I know you guys enjoy those videos. And the problem is, as you well know, I just don't have a lot of time to be able to commit to that level of study. And Tom is just better at it than me, and he can get them out a lot more regularly than I can. He's going to say, no, yes, he is. You're going to see this live in just a minute. So Tom, real quick, I can say more about later on myself and my own schedule. And maybe at the very end of the video, I'll say something what's going on with me and just the things going on with me and my side of the channel. But tell me a bit about you, your educational background, why you love Greek, etc.
Sure. I started my education relationship to Greek at a Bible college in Dallas, and the strength of the Bible college, in case for those of you who might know it, it's Criswell College, but their strength was that you had to have a solid background in Greek and a solid background in Hebrew in order to graduate with a bachelor's. And I just found that it came very, very naturally to me. I just really enjoyed it. And not only that, I came back from a Master of Arts in New Testament Greek. And probably the funnest year I ever had was, every quarter they did quarters, and every quarter I had to study not only the text from the original Greek, but I had to do a Hebrew class as well. Wow. And do exposition in Hebrew. So I loved that. And so then went on there, also did a Master of Divinity at Capital Seminary, which little sister school to Dallas Seminary, and enjoyed that very much. Had a really, really hard time with some of the courses that were like history or archaeology. My mind just doesn't work that way. But the language classes I loved. Yeah. So I've always sort of taken that as in terms of my direction or trajectory, and ended up doing some coursework at Summer Institute of Linguistics, which works with Wycliffe Bible translators. So did a lot of like discourse grammar and, moving language study further beyond simple grammar and syntax into semantics.
Let me pause you real quick because I have just touched on the word discourse grammar also in some of the previous videos. Do me a favor and tell us a little bit of the difference tell me just the real basic difference in actual grammar, syntax, and then discourse grammar, because there really is a progression there.
Sure. Grammar is just the simple word as we understand it. It's a past tense verb or something like that. But within that, you move beyond that to say, okay, in its context, What is its aspect? If we say, I'm jumping, I can look at the form of that and say, okay, that's a, helping verb, you got a participle, you put those two together. So we know that. But in terms of the context, I'm jumping off a cliff is different than I'm jumping rope.
Right.
And so that's where we get into the syntax of it to say, okay, how are we looking at this within its context? So that's still sentence level, though. Discourse grammar is, all right, when you go beyond that, there are certain indicators of discourse, of a function where you have to go beyond the sentence in order to understand this little piece.
Right.
For instance,
it functions as a part of a larger whole. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
yes, exactly right. Yeah. For instance, the particle day in Greek, we translate it like and or but. Well, in Greek, if you're talking about a narrative where there's an interchange or a conversation, it's what's called a switch reference. And so you put that particle in there to tell you that, this guy was talking, and then you have the day, and then you have another quote, but it's the other person or the other people.
Right.
So that particle, without going into the discourse, you would say, well, that's just and or but.
Right.
But it has a discourse function. Yeah.
I remember my very first year of Greek learning that your basic conjugate, your conjunctions, kai, de, and even Allah, that sometimes they're translated and sometimes but, and sometimes not. How can they be all three? I always thought that was odd. And then syntax, oh, well, it's context. It's not until I got into Runge's discourse grammar. I'm like, oh, 3 years into my Greek studies, now I'm understanding some of the differences.
Right.
We'll come back to that in just a minute because that's still hot on my mind. But I interrupted your story about, so you're a Capital Bible, you're loving your classes, you're getting into the details. So continue.
Yeah, so I just found myself really hungry for Greek and Hebrew, not as much. I still really enjoy Hebrew, but the precision of the Greek, I really enjoy.
Text from time to time. Come on, that's fantastic. You love that.
I know Shema Yisrael,
Right.
I know a few things like that off the top of my head, but anyway.
So you finished Capital. What was next? Because you did you went into doctoral level work as well, right?
Yes, and I'm one of those ABD guys. I just could never agree with the committee in terms of what I wanted to do or what I could do because they wanted me to do theory and I wanted to do meaning.
Yeah.
And they said, no. You're one. I said, of course, I want to take the tools that you've given me and I want to take it into meaning. In fact, I really wanted to do the book of Galatians and work on the book of Galatians in terms of the discourse features of the book. So
that's linguistics level studies in PhD studies. And again, for those of you who are interested, I'll plug again the Galatians video because a lot of the conversation we had on Galatians came out of some of the doctoral work that you did there. And then for years you've been just studying and preaching and teaching Greek grammar at Grace Biblical Seminary. It's I'm sure elsewhere as well. And then you also just finished a doctorate. Is that right now? Are you now officially Dr. Eckman?
I'm this far. And actually, that is about word pictures that are formed by the discourse, by the various discourses, or putting parables together so that you see the pictures together. So, yeah,
I'm
and that's right up my alley.
Call you Dr. Eckman because you may as well be.
Hope soon to be.
Very good. So let's dig down. We already touched a little bit on Greek before we do. And I'm going to show off some of your works, but let me just, before I do, since you're taking over the Learning Greek by Reading the Good New Testament series, I set that series up because I had, obviously, I took my Greek the classical way, but there's no problem with that insofar as you can learn it that way. Clearly I did and you did and learned it well. There are drawbacks associated with it. In fact, I have shown this book before. This book is of a classic, as you well know. In fact, this is probably an older edition. I'm sure there's many editions beyond the second now. And this is not the only classic grammar. I mean, this one obviously came long before That's
Dana and Manny.
that's a much older. So if you, I do would, if just say a little bit for people who haven't, they're still considering Greek, or they want to know why would I do it the way that we're doing on this channel? Why not just do it the traditional seminary way? Why would we want to just jump right into a text as opposed to what we're doing here? Can you speak to kind of the approaches to learning Greek?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And different people learn languages differently.
Mhm.
And I learned it the traditional way, and that is the way my mind works. I remember when I was first learning Portuguese, for instance, which is another language that I've spent some time with. But I would walk down the street with a friend he was studying English, I was studying Portuguese, and I would say, okay, what's the second person plural of this verb?
Mhm.
And in the imperfect tense, for instance.
Yeah.
And he would go, oh, okay. And then he would ask me a question, how do you say this? Or what does this expression mean? And
Yeah.
so we were having all those kinds of discussions, and my mind is putting each of those endings into a puzzle so that I could build the paradigm. And that's the way my mind works. So works very well with Greek. And when I first studied Greek, one of the things that I had to do, my final exam in first year Greek, was I had to conjugate luo in 150 different forms.
God
And
bless
that
you.
was the final. That was the final. So, and some people learn language like that, and I get it. But for a lot of us, it's simply jumping in. And it's what we call immersion.
Mhm.
And that's really what you're trying to do, is to say, let's read it, let's look at it, let's see
Mhm.
it. And then the more that we're simply exposed to it, and of course, that's partially what I did in a couple
Yeah.
other languages as well. I go and I'm in that country and I begin to hear, and I don't know all the answers and I can't fit all the pieces. But the more that I'm able to, simply by, in this case, we're looking, we're seeing, we're recognizing the endings, um, we're hearing the vocabulary and seeing the vocabulary. For a lot of people, that is the very, very best way
Yeah.
to learn a language. So,
Well, it's kind of I'm going to say something. I'm going to take it right away. Okay. There's this whole idea of natural language acquisition where I'm going to try to learn the language the way I did when I was a child. All right. So in my own PhD work in theory of education, I don't actually think that you can really work that way anymore. I think the neuroplasticity is a different structure entirely today. But that being said, to now to kind of come back this way a bit, it seems to me, going back to my Greek classes and my classmates who took it with me, they spent, I think, more time frustrated with the paradigms and the rules and what's this rule and language. Language turned into like this mathematical logical structure, and there's actually truth to that, but they got frustrated. Whereas it seems to me that if you can spend your time struggling with the actual text of the New Testament, now you're actually in here. Yeah, it's hard and you're struggling, but you're learning the actual Greek text that God inspired. So it seems to me that the immediate benefits are more obvious if you do an immersion kind of approach.
yes, yeah, you're going to more quickly be able to get some benefits and see some benefits. Yes, because many of the students I went with, they struggled through with learning it mechanically,
Mhm.
like I did,
Yeah.
but weren't able to reap the benefits because they were so busy struggling with all the paradigms and all of that they get to the end and they go, okay, how do I use this? When am I going to get to use this?
Right. And it takes a lot of faith. C.S. Lewis, in a different context, he used this illustration about how, as a child, learning classical Greek and hated learning it, but it wasn't until he was an adult, having mastered classical Greek, that he can enjoy the Iliad, he can enjoy Homer. But as a child, he talks about the discipline necessary imposed upon him from without. So he could, well, a lot of us, especially to your earlier point, schools these days, universities, for better or worse, seminaries don't require the languages because
Right.
people don't want to go through that. And if you're watching this video this far, and apparently you do, so good for you. Tom, before we
Yeah.
move on actual text, so granted, we're doing immersion on this channel. Should students get a copy of something like this? How would you suggest that they supplement their studies with the classical mechanical approach?
With mounts as a resource, because what I really like about mounts, and I was introduced to mounts long after I had been involved in Greek studies, but I really enjoy the fact that he is a word builder. And so if you're trying to figure out why these things make sense or why these endings work the way that they do and how they work in a particular context, he's very, very good that way in a way that I haven't seen in other grammars.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of a supplement, if we're talking through something in one of the videos where we go, okay, substantival participle, for instance, well, you've got access to the participles. You can look at the extra information. You can look at all the other pieces that you may want to try to figure out on your own, when we're talking about those different ideas.
Good. And dear viewer, don't be surprised, Tom, and you feel free from time to time just to make some of those. Here's just a strict grammar piece to help you go along. Here's a reference piece. You want to do those from time to time, you can do those as well too. Those are good background. I've always, again, these are things that I'm planning on doing, and just with my life, my doctoral work, and my wife is graduating law school, and so everybody's watched the channel long, they've seen the background change a few times, and so God just opened this door, so I appreciate that. Let's move something a little more fun. So let's kind of show the world a bit. Let's do a actual. Can we take a few minutes to do an actual passage in Greek, Tom?
Sure.
Is that all right?
Sure.
So, by the way, I got a couple of books pulled up. I have this text right here. It fell over a minute ago. This is one of Tom's books that he recently released. Let me pull the screen back up so you can see well, it doesn't matter. So I have the physical copy. It's right here. Jesus the Messiah. This is a sort of a kind of a commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, right?
Kind of a commentary, yeah.
It's kind of studies in the Gospel of Matthew. You also did one on the book of James, and this is a proper commentary all the way through James, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's a verse by verse, start to finish.
And I will just say both of these are from an explicitly free grace perspective. So for those who are interested in that particular theological perspective, I highly recommend. They're both phenomenal resources. The Rev Reads YouTube channel has reviewed both of these books, glowing reviews. I will put links to those in the description below. So do yourselves a favor, check out those books. But let's pull up Romans 5:1 and 2. And Tom, I pulled up Blue Letter Bible. I know that you've used this in the past, and I have mentioned this resource to viewers in the past. I don't know how many people know it really, really well, but this is such a great little resource. It's free. It's got, all the standard translations. It's got the Textus Receptus behind it, because it's the text that's behind the King James, the Greek text. And so it's really, really easy to get access to the Greek words. Any thoughts real quick before we get into Romans 5:1 and 2 on this tool and why you find it useful and why you use it in some of your classes?
Well, in my particular case, I work with a lot of internationals in terms of ministry. And so for them to be able to have access to this and this amount of information easily, of course, they need to have some English, some knowledge of English, but the tools that are accessible here, for anybody is wonderful. And as Chris is showing you, you've got lots of options in terms of, cross references, and as he's showing you, the interlinear in particular.
Yeah.
Great tools that are easy.
Yeah, that's where I spend most of my time. So let's do this. Let's look at Romans 5:1 and 2, and let's learn a little Greek by reading the Greek New Testament 5:1 and 2. I know you're I believe you're a New King James guy, so I'm just going to read 5:1 and 2 in English here, and then I'm just going to you tell me what you want to click, and you just take away and take us through Romans 5:1 and 2. The text says, "Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we also have access by faith into this grace in which we stand and rejoice in the hope of the glory of God." Well, that's a good English translation, but that's not the words that God inspired, Tom. So I'm going to pull the Greek text up of here, and why don't you start walking us through the text? I'll follow you along.
Sure. Okay. Your first word there, you may recognize if you've had some Greek, dikaiathentes. It's from dikaiao. As you can see, I appreciate you doing that, Chris. But the idea here is that this is something that happened before what happens next, because this is an aorist participle.
Mhm.
So in fact, it's an aorist passive participle. So in other words, something happened to me in the past,
Mhm.
and as a result of something that happened to me in the past, I now have this present state, and that's why in the next section, Eckman, you see there, almost my name.
Yeah, that's right. Right
We
there.
have, and that's a present tense verb. So we have what? We have peace. We have peace with God. But again, based on this fact that we have been justified by faith.
So
So we were
having been
justified by faith.
justified.
It's a past action. It's again, it's a done deal.
Mhm.
That the moment that we exercised faith, we entered into this position of having peace with God. So interesting piece there, and lots of prepositions. By faith or out of faith. You have ek pistuos,
Mhm.
right?
Here.
In that dependent clause, having been justified by faith.
So
And then
ek
we
is
have,
out of, and then pistuos, there's your that's out of faith, right? So
right,
therefore justified by faith. Okay. Go ahead.
okay. And then we have peace, and notice prostantheon. We would expect, if we're talking about with, we're thinking the preposition soon in
Mhm.
Greek.
Right.
Well, why pros?
Yeah.
Pros, typically we're talking about to or toward, is kind of the words that we have if we memorize the initial vocabulary. Well, pros actually can be used to talk about an association or a relationship. And it's in this case, it's particularly this relationship that we now have with God, and it's a relationship of peace, and it's because of our justification by faith.
So let me pause and ask you a question here, because this is
Yeah.
something that again, the classical learning glosses it can be helpful, and it can also create some issues. There might be some people here who learn pros and immediately think towards, and they think the root meaning is to towards. And so they
Mm-hmm.
might want to suggest that this means, therefore, we have peace towards God, and they try to draw some sort of idea out of that. Now,
Right.
how would you say yes and no to that? Or is it all yes? Is it all no? How would you respond to that sort of idea?
Right. And that's really the level of syntax, and that's where some people it's becomes dangerous to know just enough Greek,
Right.
that you assume it's something like saying I'm jumping, and assume that must be this repetitive ongoing idea. Where, like I said, if I say he is jumping off the cliff, well, he's only going to do that one time. You
Exactly.
know? So
And
it's
there's a
all you
visual difference
always
of
want to do
jumping
the
off a cliff versus like jumping in place. I mean, those have different ideas. Like jumping off is different than just jumping. The physical act is the same, but there's a real difference in those two ideas also.
sure. Well, but again, if I'm standing there and I'm looking up at the bridge,
Mhm.
and I see the guy on the edge, and I'm standing with a group of people, and I simply say he's jumping.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, I'm using that progressive idea to capture the event. But
That
again,
means
he's not going
something
to do it more
very
than once.
different. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, at least not typically. So, in any
Right.
case, I would just say that with Greek prepositions, that almost all of them have this range of ideas, and
Mhm.
some of the range maybe very much beyond what we typically learn when we learn a simple definition. And that's just the difference between first year Greek and saying, okay, this is a preposition that may
Right.
have a lot of ideas associated with it. And I just need to be careful to think through what the possible options are. And
And
in
so
this
that's a
particular case,
hallmark, which is both a strength and a weakness of a more immersive approach, is you're getting second year stuff day one, day two, day three, and that creates
yes,
complications, but it also, you develop a richer appreciation for what the text can be.
yes, yeah.
So when you come to proston theon, so we've seen, I have a righteousness. This happened in the past already. Somewhere in
Hmm.
the past, I get that because it's an aorist participle. And we've mentioned, you didn't mention the post positive un. Y'all, by the way, he mentions the post-positive un in the video that he's already done.
Yeah.
Come back to that. So where does this come? I'm just summarizing what you said. Out of faith. So what do we have? I'm sorry, we have, and this is your verb, you said, peace, and then it's toward God. So then would you just take this as with God and be done, or would you make any particular emphasis on the word choice of pros here?
Yes, I would say, again, most 99% of translations, I'm sure, are going to go with,
Mm-hmm.
and that's perfectly adequate translation. But in terms of a contrast between using that pros and soon,
Mm-hmm.
pros has the focus of the relationship or the association, and it's an association or a relationship, a peace that we have because of our justification by faith.
Nice. Very good.
So, yeah,
Very good.
and of course, dia tu kriou, it's because of or through our Lord Jesus Christ. Oh, you
Hang
lost
on.
it
I hit a button. This is what happens when you're court. It's okay. So we're back here. All right. So pull this back up. So we are dia to
there. There
right.
we go.
Dia to kriou. All right.
And kriou, kurios, you probably know as Lord. Hamon, you see the genitive there, that genitive plural ending, God of us, or Lord of us.
Yep. So
And
the
then
own
Jesus
ending of
Christ.
us, plural.
So, and it's a genitive chain. You can notice that following that preposition with the genitive, but look at that to, and then kuriou, and then Hamon is genitive plural, and then Yesu is genitive,
Again, this is
Christu
just
is
something nice. If
genitive.
you, while you're still learning your thing, so dia, it's a genitive. That's why we went to it's a preposition, but then to, you can just see the G is a genitive.
Got it. Thanks,
You,
Chris. Yeah.
G is a genitive. Humon, G is a genitive. Christu, or Yesu rather, G is a genitive. So this is a long genitive chain. Tom, I've mentioned genitives a little bit in previous lessons, but would you just real quick touch on when uh now I think we've seen a lot of them here. We haven't seen so what tell me a little bit about let's talk about genitives just for a second. Obviously that could be hours of a discussion, but just tell me a little about the concept here.
Sure. First year Greek, you're going to learn a genitive, and you're going to say, "Oh, that's possession."
Mm-hmm.
You know, the the um, the house of me. So my house, right? So
Sure.
you're going to
And
use
here you
that
have
linking
our
word,
Lord, the Lord of me, right?
right? And in that particular case with Hamon, it's pointing back to Lord. But
Mm-hmm.
the chain as a whole, that's you're talking about the object of the preposition. Because again, first year Greek, you're going to say, well, I see a genitive, I'm thinking, possession. But in the chain, but tu kuriou and Jesu Christu are genitive singular because it's object of the preposition. They're governed by the dia. Dia is going to take, in this case, the genitive
Mm-hmm.
to tell you that this is through, and if you want to think about another verse that might come to your mind, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And that's what we see here, that we have peace with God through, excuse me,
Right.
through our Lord Jesus Christ.
Right.
Okay.
So again, just putting the logic together, if I can just recap. So I
By
have
means of,
so the righteousness. So there's this participle, this aorist active participle. This is something that happened in the past, and
yeah.
it's a righteousness that I have. Or I mean justification. That's the idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is all therefore I'm justified. How am I justified? By works, right? By being good, right? By committing and going to church every single week, right? No. How am I justified? By faith. Can I just
Yeah.
get you to say real quick? There's people who debate what is this special magical word pisteos, pistis. What does pistis mean in Greek? Because everybody debates this all the time.
Sure. And I would say, faith and trust are the same word in Greek. They get translated as either faith or trust, depending on the context by most translators.
Mhm.
but and for us, those are similar ideas, but we tend to pull them apart, and Greek would not. So something that you rely upon, right, is kind of the idea.
That's
And
always been my preferred vision is image is relying upon something.
and trust is it's about someone else. You know, if I trust you, it's not about what I'm doing. It's I'm relying upon you for something,
So
right?
I could take the idea of therefore I have in the past been justified out of this relying upon this out of faith. And of course, it's the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the larger context. Because
Yep.
of that, we have, what do we have? Peace. So peace, we have Irene and Echoman. And who do we have with proston theon? We have this peace with God. He's the object, however you want to phrase that. So we have peace with him. And then how do we have that? You have the preposition dia through, and what's through here is the peace, right? It's the peace
Yeah.
that's through. What is the peace through? The Lord of us. So dia curiou, the Lord whom hamon of us. So our Lord, Lord of us. And who is this Lord? Jesu Christu, Jesus Christ. That's
Yeah.
kind of the idea so far, right?
And dia with the idea of, we say through, well, what do we mean by that? It's like by means of. He is the source. That's how we have it.
Yeah, so this peace is the means of the peace is even Jesus Christ himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, if this doesn't rule out any sort of attempt to justify or have, if not have peace with God, if the idea that you could possibly have peace with God by doing good works or trying to please God, it's ruled out with Romans 5:1,
Right.
isn't it?
Right.
So, very good. All right, anything else in here for you want to look at the rest of the verse or rest of the sentence? All right. And again, the nice thing about Blue Letter Bible, you just click the tools and there's the next line. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. So through whom also, and there's your Kai, where you say, okay, in the context, why would we have and here?
Yeah.
Or even through whom also. And then there's this word. This is a really interesting word, and I'll come back to it, the prosagoge. And you see here in your translation is access,
Mm-hmm.
right? And some translations use the word introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll come back to it after we look at the rest of the verse. We probably should do the rest of the verse briefly.
Sure.
But this is really the critical word that people miss. And because they miss this word, they miss the word picture, because there's actually a word picture going on here. But you may notice, if you've had some Greek background, prosagoge, you got the word pros, to or toward,
Yep.
if we're looking at it typically, and then ago is I lead, but here is a noun, so leader, right,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the idea. So leader too, if I'm trying to look at the parts of this word, but
Sure.
again, we'll come back to it. So escakemen is we have, and you notice
Mm-hmm.
that the English translation is through whom also we have, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is that's not a present. That is actually a perfect.
Yep. Right here. And again, you guys can see it right here. Perfect active indicatives. This is a verb. Yep. Okay.
And so this access thing, well, I'll call it that for the moment. This access, we have had it. It already occurred, and now we have the ongoing repercussions of that, whatever that is that we have had. Okay.
Right.
So that's our first. We're going to have another perfect here.
And the baseline
Again,
understanding of
translated.
perfect, Tom, real quick, the baseline understanding of a perfect, I realize, again, second year Greek, you can start nuancing this quite a bit, but the basic idea of a perfect is what?
And in this case, it's an action that began in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and it has ongoing consequences. That go on from the present into the future.
Yeah, I like, and tell me if this is fair. I like the illustration of the difference in I studied versus I have studied. I have
Yes.
studied indicates to me there's a completedness to it. And because I have studied, that implies, it's just an implication, but it's fair, a readiness. I have studied versus I studied. That doesn't make any implication. I might be ready. I also might not.
Yes, and in this case, that works really, really well because we're talking about we've had our access or introduction might be more helpful here, which some of the versions go with prosagoge. They'll use the word introduction. So we've had our introduction. You know, I have been introduced to Chris.
Yeah.
Well, now I know him because I have had my introduction. And that's the idea that we have here. Whatever this thing is in prosagoge, I've already had it, and now I still have it in my possession, so to speak.
So we're tracking the time. This, just like in the previous verse, the justification was behind us, and we're looking now. In this case, this introduction, whatever it is behind us. I have had that already. It's a completed thing in my past that's still has some impact on me now.
Yes. Yeah.
That again, this is what I tell people. This stuff, it's not that this is a bad translation. It's a good translation. It's just this is the Greek text really does offer some clarity and it really does offer some color that you just can't see in English. There's no way to bring it out.
Absolutely, absolutely, and and like I said, that's the first one. You know, we've had this introduction by faith, and then notice into not only into grace, but it says into the grace. What grace? This grace.
Yeah.
Into this grace.
So that whole phrase you're talking about here.
Right.
Aistain, karin, tautain.
And you'll notice, for those of you who are looking at the words, you've got the preposition ace, and then you've got several accusatives.
Yep.
You know, tain with the new, karin with the new, tautain with the new. And that tells you you're looking at an accusative singular. So you've got that chain of accusative singulars because they are the object of the preposition, and ace can take the accusative. They're governed by that preposition ace. Okay, so in any case, but it's into this grace. So then you say, well, okay, what grace are we talking about? Well, the grace that we've been talking about all the way through chapter 4.
Right.
You know, to the one who works, his wage is not reckoned as grace. It's not about grace if it's about works. Right? Grace is something else.
And that's why it's te piste.
Yeah. It's by faith into this grace. And again, the grace that we've been talking about. So, but notice how he goes on in which there's another he's got these bunch of prepositions in a row.
Piling up prepositions.
And I apologize, I've got this frog in my throat, but in which, and then we have a stakemen. It's probably one you wouldn't recognize, but it's actually from histemi, right? Yep, here we go. And that's another perfect. And it's another place that typically gets translated as a present in most English translations. And the idea here is we started standing in this grace in the past when we received our introduction, when we had our introduction. And now we are still standing in this grace.
Yeah.
So it's very, very cool to have these two perfect tense verbs. Right. When we're talking about something like having been justified by grace, we've had our introduction or access, and now we have been standing in this grace. Right. And as a result, the next one is we rejoice presently. Then we have a present tense. We rejoice in the hope of the glory of God.
Yep. And there's that kai. And so it's we have stood and we rejoice. And that's not a perfect. So that standing is in the past and completed, but this is a present.
Yeah.
So we're rejoicing
now. So while we're standing in the grace, and because we've had our introduction, and so we've already been introduced, and we've been standing in his grace, now we're rejoicing.
And again, to go back to the English, I have studied, I could say I have studied and am ready. I have studied is an English perfect. Am ready would be an English present. I have studied and am ready. I have stood and am rejoicing. It's that same kind of idea, right?
Yeah. And I really like the idea of standing. I really like the idea of I have been standing.
Yeah. I
I have
have
been
been
standing.
standing.
I'm standing here now, and I've been standing here since I was introduced.
Yeah, no, that's
Right.
really, really good. I like that. Yep.
So, but if to polish up, because I know there's a lot more here, but if I can go back to that prosagoge just for a second,
Sure.
that's really the critical piece. And again, that's this really old word that's very difficult to capture and usually gets translated as access or introduction. But this was a very specific term for being allowed into the presence of somebody in a higher position. And the idea here is that Jesus is the one who leads us to God the Father, or the King, so to speak. And if he's on the throne, the one who allows us to enter into his presence and leads us to him and gives us our introduction to him is Jesus.
Yeah.
And so in the word picture, Jesus is our escort, so to speak, to the throne. And so we have received our our introduction to God the King.
That's so
And
good.
as a result, we are standing and have been standing in his presence.
So that standing isn't merely this sort of ethical, I'm living. This is an actual word picture of you're standing in a royal court. And the reason I'm at this place in the royal courtroom is because the escort is one who brought me in.
Yes.
That's why I get to be, this is really more about presence than it is about conduct.
And I have been permitted, I have been permitted.
Love that
Yeah,
permission.
I've received permission and I've been escorted by this Jesus.
And how do we
Yeah.
get that permission? Again, theologically, I'm going to emphasize it's because of
Yeah.
it's through faith. It's again, I just think that's such an
I relied
yeah,
upon him. I trusted him. Yeah.
right. Real quick, just as an aesthetic point, I think people
Beautiful
sometimes miss how
picture.
pretty the language can be. Escape common and estay common. I would be shocked if Paul has not done this little parallel word pun thing on purpose. You see this all over the Greek New Testament where they'll take words and parallel them. And I guess exegetically, we can argue that it's important because it pulls emphasis out of the text. He's clearly pairing words up. Yes, it's pretty, but that seems to also be connecting the ideas because they sound similar to. Am I right or am I wrong in that connection?
Yeah, no, you're right. And he has a purpose. He has a purpose for using the perfects here. And it's unfortunate that they're difficult to translate.
Right.
And I appreciate the difficulty there as somebody who works with translation,
Right.
to be able to capture some of these ideas. And how on earth do you capture prosagoge as a single word when it has this rich set of ideas surrounding it?
Right. And I
Yeah.
guess there's nothing else really to add. El pepidi taste doxane to theou. So that's just upon or on the hope of the glory of God. That's pretty straightforward, right? You just said learn your
Yeah.
vocabulary and just that kind of pops out easily enough. Anything in particular there?
As a teaser, though, if you talk about that idea of hope,
Yeah.
you jump down to verse 5, he brings up hope again, right?
Now hope. There you go.
Yeah. Take a look at that in the Greek.
Yeah,
Okay.
see, you guys have homework. That's fun. So
Hope does not disappoint because the Holy Spirit, and then he uses another perfect, has been poured out. So he uses another perfect. He got poured out and he's still in there. He's still
so
in our
the use
hearts.
of perfects. So then, Tom, if we were doing a proper video here, we've done all sorts of
Yeah.
exegetical notes. How would you offer? This is pretty smooth. It comes to New King James, but how would you do? I need to pull up just a fresh Greek on its own so we do together? How would you kind of render these and offer a general interpretational bottom line? How would you do that?
Are you talking about how would I capture it if I were trying to do a translation?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Is
mean,
that the
and
question?
recognizing you can't, but if you were to try to take all this, let's just do it one verse. How would you kind of translate this? And maybe it's just exactly the New King James says it. How would you render verse 1?
All right.
Easily without
And
worrying about being
I like the New King James fairly well in this. You know, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ.
so they've got that about right. Anything in so and then you would bring out what if you're focused on preaching this again. So what are the big thing your takeaway out of the Greek text would be?
A few things. I would probably focus on the dikaiothentos, the having been justified, past action that results in a present state, and that's why he uses a present with Eckman.
Mm-hmm.
And then beyond that, this with God, the idea of pros there,
Mm-hmm.
and why would we not use soon? Why would we use pros? So that's those would probably be the two things. I'm sure a lot of people would focus on the Irene, you know, with peace,
Yeah.
and that whole concept of peace, you know, in the presence of God, which is great stuff as well. But
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm curious about the use of Irene just in Pauline literature and in Romans. I don't know where the first time it's used in Romans. It seems pretty profound that he says in 5:1 it is transitional, therefore having peace with God, but that's probably a larger question than just this verse. Okay, and then we get down to verse 2. So this is kind of where you picked a bit. So would you render it with the New King James or would you slightly massage it differently? That's hard, I know.
I usually end up talking about prosagoge a lot, just simply because it's so hard to capture. So, you know, through whom also we have received an audience, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, an audience with the king, so to speak, but it's not just an audience because it's an audience that's ongoing.
Right.
And we're standing with the king. And I make the point that who is it that normally stands in the presence of the king instead of bows?
Oh, yeah, that's good. I'm assuming you're thinking like the prince and the princess is the royal family, right?
The royal family. That's exactly
That's
right.
so good.
And theologically, you know, if we're
Yeah.
children of God, you know, if we become children of God by faith, you know, to as many as received him, he gave them authority to be children of God, even to as many as believed. So, and here's the concept of faith again, that establishes that relationship. So it's another great part of this word picture that comes about just simply because of that one word prosagoge. So how do you capture it? You know, and even audience really doesn't do a great job of translating prosagoge, but as a result, if you know who you are, if you know your identity on the basis of faith,
Right.
you know, if you truly understand that, that is absolutely a reason for rejoicing.
Well, I'll say one quick thing, and then before we finish up here, personally, I'm looking at this from a more pastoral perspective. The thing that a lot of preachers want to focus on, it seems to me, is the peace and the rejoicing, because that's something I can tell people they can grab onto, right? But the problem is, if you don't understand the theological structure behind this, if I point my finger at you, Thomas, say, be at peace and go rejoice, that can make you feel pretty anxious and frustrating. How do I rejoice when I don't want to?
Yeah, you're supposed to rejoice.
Yeah. Paul is like, peace is what comes out of these truths, and rejoicing is what comes out of. Paul's wanting us to focus on the truths of our justification by faith in our position in Christ that results in peace. So rather than focusing on, this is not a thing to do. This is a fruit to enjoy. And this is not a thing. Rejoicing on we're supposed to rejoice, but this is a kind of for lack of a better word, a natural kind of a supernatural, if you will, bubbling out of the joy of God, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and etc. Right?
And you're standing in the presence of your Father on the basis of Jesus' work, on the basis of your trust in him and his work. You've been brought into the presence of your Father. You're standing in his presence. man, if you know that's where you are,
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
you said, it's bubbling over.
How can you not? I mean, I'm not, I'm smiling now because like just the thought, I was like, wow. And you're like, it's just how, this is the kind of thing that to me strikes me as the source of real Christian joy. So there's other
Yeah,
stuff I'm going to be doing in my own work on what's the technical field called phenomenology, and the phenomenology of the Christian walk, and the actual experience that comes out of not a point and you do this or else, but this the experience out of your identity that comes out of your identity is
right,
just, it's
right,
phenomenal. But that means you have to know your identity, and then you have to be intentional about,
right.
pardon the language, standing in it. And I
Yep,
think Paul's all about that.
absolutely,
So very
absolutely.
good. So y'all, this is what Tom is going to get to give you on a regular basis without me interrupting every 5 seconds. So I appreciate that, Tom, so very much. Again, I'm looking forward to seeing what you have. And I will tell the audience, like, I really enjoy doing the Greek videos. Call a spade a spade. The time commitment it takes, clearly for me, I apologize to you all for having not done them more. The time commitment of Tom, he's seen the process. It takes a minute to put those videos together, doesn't it? And
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
I'm just not as good at Greek as Tom is. So whereas Tom can put them together faster than I can, I put them together. Clearly, you've seen me, but it takes some time. So I think that the overall quality of the videos and the quality of the learning Greek by reading Greek, I think that's going to increase dramatically as Tom gets to get into some of the depths of the text.
Yeah.
And always, guys, of course, questions, comments, cries of art, she'll be responding there. The first video, as if you're watching this, that first video, he's already recorded and is up. And we will be recording those videos on the regular. That's an agreement he and I have. If you want to support that process, check the link in the below. I also have a subscribe star. So I do want to encourage you, if you want to support that process, that there's a way to financially do so as well. Certainly your prayers would be appreciated as well. So Tom, thank you again. Anything else you want to share? I know you have another point you've got to get to. Anything else you want to share before I let you go here, sir?
No, I'm looking forward to great things to come.
Very
Yeah.
good. Well, Tom, personally, thank you again. Look forward to having you. I'm seeing your videos. Look forward to having you back on the channel. Again, we're hopefully going to do a Galatians project. We'll figure our schedules out there as well, or something along those lines. And for everybody else, I am out of coffee. And so on that, let me just say, Tom, to you and everybody else, may God richly bless you.
God bless.